In today's episode, we're diving into a topic that strikes fear into the hearts of even the bravest buyers, the Building and Pest Inspection Report.
Ah, yes, it's one of the most common moments where buyers completely freeze up. You get this report back. It's full of confusing terms, diagrams, technical jargon, and suddenly you're thinking, I just made a huge mistake. Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to become educated home buyers.
I'm Veronica and that was Megan. We are two of Australia's most experienced buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum, which is a good thing because between us, we've got almost 50 years experience to share with you, and together we're going to cut through the BS and make sure that you're well informed so you make better decisions.
Now, when you get to the end of this episode, make sure you check out the website, homebuyeracademy.com.au. Take a look at our course for first home buyers.
We've created an easy-to-follow course that builds on all of our professional experience to take you step by step through the whole home buying journey.
You'll know exactly what to do, when to do it, and be able to find your first home faster and easier with our guidance along the way.
It's the next best thing to having your very own buyer's agent.
Now, before we get into the interesting stuff, in this week's episode, there's the boring bit to do, and that's the disclaimer.
You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes their time to personally understand your situation. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority or your trusted advisors, or both, to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're translating inspector speak into plain English and giving you a rundown of 10 red flags that often pop up in these reports and what they actually mean. Because some of them are not nearly as scary as they sound. And if you're watching the video, you'll see that Megan and I have behind us a diagram showing the PACE system, which is the 10 steps that we take all of our students through in the process of buying a property. And they cover, PACE stands for preparation, action, commitment, and execution. We are looking today at a small part of the evaluation. I've got my finger pointing at step 7, which is part of the commitment phase, and it's the property evaluation. So there's only one small part of what you need to do when you are evaluating a property, but it's pretty important if you're buying a house that you get a building pest inspection. So let's get into this.
Now, as Veronica mentioned, sometimes these building and pest reports aren't actually as scary as they sound, but spoiler alert, there are a few that should actually raise your eyebrows. And if you're not sure how to tell the difference, that is exactly why we created the First Home Buyer course. It walks you through how to interpret a report properly and know what's worth negotiating over and walking away from, or just kind of keeping an eye on.
Yeah. All right, let's hit it. Red flag number 1, high moisture readings detected. That's usually the language that is used or something like that in the report. It always sounds serious, and it can be, don't get us wrong, but often it's just telling you that there's moisture in a wall or a ceiling. The real question is, why is it there?
Exactly. It could be poor ventilation. It could be a leaky pipe or just a really steamy bathroom. But without knowing the source, it's really hard to gauge what the actual risk is.
And that's where deeper investigation and actually asking the right follow-up questions comes in, right? We teach you how to do that in the course because otherwise you're relying on guesswork. But you've got to talk to the inspector to know how to work out whether a moisture reading is a big problem or not. Sometimes it is a big problem. It's a huge cost that you're going to be up against. And other times it's quite standard. I'll give you an example. Victorian terraces, they're quite common in the area in which I buy, and nearly all of them have got rising damp. Now, it's annoying and it's bad, and at some point you're probably going to have to deal with it, but how bad is it? And has it ever been dealt with? And, you know, is it just a little bit in one corner or is it the entire wall? You know, there's how long is a piece of string, I guess, with that. So you do have to ask those questions.
Absolutely. Now, red flag number 2 is when you see the words evidence of termite activity, right? This is a panic kind of stations one, particularly, you know, we almost every report in Queensland has this, right?
Yeah.
It's a big one and it does make people panic, but here's the truth. Termite activity is really common in a lot of areas of Australia.
So it doesn't necessarily mean the house is falling down. The key is understanding whether the damage is past or present, right? So let's look at past for starters. You go, how much damage was done? Has it been rectified? Or is it present? How widespread is it? And has it been treated? Like, if it's, the thing too is that, if you're in an area where houses are of a certain age, it's really hard to get a property that has had no termite activity ever. It's really difficult to come across a property that's completely virgin when it comes to termite activity. So
also that extra question, Veronica, is it in the house or is it in the fences? Because it's really common in the fences in Queensland, really common. Could be in a stump in the yard. So what you really want to know is it actually in the house, in the structure, or are you saying that there's evidence of it in the gardens and surrounds? Because you'll never get rid of that completely.
No, but what you will need to do is make sure that you have a system in place if you buy that property that protects you and is, looking at making sure you're keeping a close eye on it, because you don't want it to get into the actual house.
Don't want them to come visiting.
Yes, so you don't want to walk away from a property just purely because it's got evidence of termite activity when it's not even current.
Absolutely. So an inspector will tell you, and this is why it's important to speak to the inspector. They'll tell you if it's active or historic. But if you don't know how to interpret the findings or what is actually considered an acceptable risk, you could walk away from a perfectly fine house just because you feel panicked by the report.
Yep. Red flag number 3, cracking in walls. Look, hairline cracks are very normal. I've got some in my house, right? But large or uneven cracking, especially on windows and doors, might indicate movement or foundation issues. So they could be important.
It could be, absolutely. So we're not saying just ignore them, but you want to kind of put it in perspective. The trick is knowing what type of cracking is typical for the age and type of the property, and which cracks are waving little red flags saying, get me checked by a structural engineer. Sometimes if you see a little bit of movement in mortar in brick homes, it might just be that it's brick facade, not double brick. It might not be that it's part of the actual framing that supports the house. But it might actually be quite a big problem if it is part of the structure.
Or if you are living in an area where everything's built on clay, like a lot of Sydney is, when you got a drought, you'll see cracks open up. And when you see a lot of rain, you'll see those cracks close. And literally when I was selling a property years ago when I was a sales agent, I went into one house and I sold this house. And they had it just up on the wall. They had a little piece of cotton with 2 little bits of sticky tape on the side of it. And the structural engineer had said to them, if that ever breaks, you've got a problem. Like their little warning system.
Hello, keeping it.
And it was because it was a clay soil, built in clay soil. It was a double brick house even, but,
Unbelievable.
I know, it's hilarious.
There are Queenslander-style houses that are actually built to move with the weather. Okay, so VJ or vertical joint boards in your 1930s, 1940s, even sort of just into the early 1950s and earlier, they were actually designed because the humid weather, they would expand and they'd contract. So sometimes you can see a beautiful wall with just, the nice even vertical joints going up and down. And then the next day after some really dry weather or, maybe some humidity, everything's moved and you can see cracks open up. You think, what in the world happened overnight in this house?
Oh, my God, yeah. So it's important to understand, what's a deal break, what's serious, what's not. Red flag number 4, roof tiles displaced or damaged. Now, it sounds dramatic. This one is often just a case of a few cracked tiles or ridge capping that's shifted.
But it's still worth understanding the age and condition of the roof. A roof that's 40 years old is very different from one that's just missing a tile or two after a storm or it's been displaced. Yeah.
In fact, I've come across old roofs where the tiles are just cracking and just basically disintegrating. So you're going to be up for a big cost to replace that roof under those circumstances. But so cracking on its own could be as simple as replacing a few tiles, could be you have to replace the whole roof. So we do show you in the course how to use this kind of information as a negotiating tool as well, because sometimes sort of repairs, particularly of a great nature that the vendors weren't aware of, can be used to adjust the purchase price. But don't go out looking and expecting your building inspection to give you that ammunition. It doesn't often work that way. But when you do have a significant issue that is you can deal with, then, you can use that to negotiate.
Yeah, good point, well made. Now, red flag number 5 is if you see the words inadequate drainage on a report. Now, this is one of those things that doesn't seem urgent, until it rains and your backyard turns into a swimming pool, or you've got some water coming in your undercroft.
Yeah, well, poor drainage can lead to rising damp. It can lead to moving slabs, right? Water pooling around foundations, which can be really bad. It's not always expensive to fix, but again, you've got to know what to look for and what's typical for the area. I've had a situation in my house where I've had to put what they call ag drain in against two of the walls of my house, because when it did rain heavily, I'd get water inside the house, and those drains have solved the problem. And they were relatively easy to install. Well, I didn't do it, but the builder did.
And this is where a plumber is your friend as well. We're talking about building and pest inspections, but we often also recommend having a plumbing inspection and an electrical inspection, depending on what the time frame is. And this is where a really good inspector can look at it and say, look, I think this can actually be solved. As you say, it might be some ag pipe, it might be a sump, it might be, there's a whole lot of ways that you can actually deal with water flow. But of course, you want to do that in conjunction with looking at the local council plan to make sure you're actually not in an overland flow area, because that's never going to be solved.
Nope. All right. Red flag number 6. Doing this one?
Subfloor ventilation insufficient. What is that? I read that before. What is that we're talking about here? It's common in older homes, especially low set character homes with, the ones that have got really limited access under the subfloor. So we're not talking about the high set.
As it's been built on stilts.
Not one that you can walk under. That ventilation is very, very efficient.
Yeah. So a lack of airflow under the house can lead to all sorts of problems. And my house, I'm thinking about my house now. I've had to install that when I did my renovation, because it can lead to mold, it can lead to wood rot, it can lead to termites, especially in humid climates, or just especially when you've got moisture. Moisture is something that you don't really want too much of that around your house. And so that's why they would recommend putting subfloor ventilation in. So now that can cost money. So you need to understand, well, what's involved and how extensive does it need to be? What could that cost be?
Yeah. But again, is it a deal breaker? You've got to talk to the inspector and you've got to use the right questions of the inspector.
Yeah, exactly right.
It isn't always a deal breaker. It is sometimes, but it isn't always. Depends on the extent of the issue and how easy it is to retrofit, vents or fans or whatever it is that needs to be fitted to fix it.
Whether you've got enough space under the house. So some houses are too close to the ground. All right, red flag number 7, dampness in bathroom. It just sort of seems like a bit of a no-brainer here, doesn't it? But anyway, you'll almost always see this in properties over 10 years old. Bathrooms are what's called wet areas. So a little dampness might be poor sealing or grout deterioration. So we're talking about dampness not on top of the tiles, but sort of underneath the tiles.
Yeah.
The walls and floors.
And the thing is, prolonged damage can lead to water getting behind the tiles and causing damage to the wall structure.
Yeah.
That's why it's really important to know, is it just surface level or is it actually structural and it's really gone in? Now, if you can get under and have a look, fabulous. If you can't, you really need to be asking the inspector about how serious it is.
The longer it goes for, the more likely you might have to replace floors and all sorts of things. So this is definitely something you've got to do further investigation, because it might be a negotiating point, or it might be something that turns out to be a deal breaker, or it might be as simple as, you've got to get in there and address the waterproofing so it doesn't get any worse.
You might be buying it thinking, I'm going to renovate this bathroom, and it doesn't matter. But knowledge is power.
Exactly right. Red flag number 8, tree roots near structure. This can be a doozy, right? Big trees close to the house can cause issues with plumbing or foundations, but again, it's not always something to panic about.
Yeah, some trees are worse than others, like, fig trees, camphor laurels, liquid ambers. These are the usual culprits. Chinese elms, these sorts of things have really extensive root systems, and I have seen them just lift concrete slabs and break them. They're incredibly strong.
A lot of people do plant the wrong trees close to their houses, but also trees have they have a maximum height that they grow to. So, what we teach you in the first home buyer course is how to ask the right questions, what to be thinking about when you get one of these reports. And certainly, there's a bunch of things you need to be thinking about if you do spot big trees in the yard, right? You might actually need to get an arborist report. So there are other things that you can look into, but you definitely want to be alert to this, because you don't want to find yourself knee deep in a block sewer pipe. That is no fun.
And if you want to renovate or extend, you want to make sure it's not a protected tree and you actually can't remove it.
That's it. Exactly. There's a lot of tree preservation orders in most councils. Exactly right.
Let's look at red flag number 9, which is timber decay or fungal growth. My God, that sounds
terrible, doesn't it?
Sounds like a bad toenail. It sounds scary. But it's often just old timber that's been exposed to moisture over time, like in subfloors or decks, or where paint hasn't been kept up and maintained.
Yeah. I mean, you can see in window frames as well, so the decay can be localised and fixable, or it could indicate sort of there's broader maintenance issues or just a lot of neglect. So again, you've really got to get into it and go, okay, well, what are we dealing with here?
Yeah. Knowing where it is, how far it's spread and what kind of timber is affected helps you figure out if it's a $200 repair or if it's a $20,000 nightmare.
And our red flag number 10, safety hazards or non-compliant structures, right? This could mean dodgy stairs all the time, don't we? All the time. Illegal extensions, missing handrails, pergolas that should never have been built, decks that should never have been built. It doesn't always mean you're going to be fined by the council or even that they're going to request that you remove it, but it could, and it certainly might mean that you need to bring things up to code after you buy, and you're going to know which things will need to be addressed and which things won't need to be addressed.
A really big one that we see is balustrade handrails aren't to current code height. And if you think about, some of those Victorians that you've talked about, some of the early Queenslanders that we look at, the height of the handrails was much lower. I don't know if kids didn't climb handrails back then and it wasn't a safe...
They didn't worry about it.
They didn't worry about it so much.
It's not just kids, it's adults. Basically, I think that a balustrade now needs to be 1 metre high, I think. And you'll go into lots of old, even just in the 60s, there's, lots of these railings on
complexes.
Yeah, they feel like they're at 60 centimetres high. You feel an adult can topple over them. That's one of it's not just kids. But I also see balustrades which have got shipping wire and they're like a ladder, so little kids can literally climb up over these things. So it
certainly doesn't meet building code now. But you do need to look at it and say, all right, well, what's my risk here? And was I looking at renovating it anyway? Is there something I can retrofit that actually brings the height up by putting, say, another handrail on top? There's things that you can do. But sometimes there's things you can't. So that's where knowing how to read council approvals and check compliance can save you a lot of headaches. And we also cover part of that in the first home buyer course. So check that out.
So a wrap up, what should you do with this information? Because you might be wondering, do I need to be a builder to understand all of this? And the answer is absolutely not.
No, you just need to know how to interpret the red flags in context and what questions to ask the inspector. And that's what we teach you.
We did put this course together. It's designed to take the stress out of these scary reports so that you don't miss a great opportunity just because of a few cracked tiles or a confusing sentence about ventilation. And I also have come across in the past some unscrupulous building inspectors who will quite sort of, it's quite calculating, but they'll give a few negative reports before they give a positive because they know that they can get more money out of you. Now, that's not very common.
It's not.
But
it does happen.
It does happen. So, you've got to be really on your game to really go, hang on a minute, and I think that's really important to give you that confidence.
Yeah. And just as importantly, it shows you when to walk away from a lemon, a do not buy, even if the kitchen looks gorgeous and you can to cook some cookies in there.
Oh, yeah. So if you want to take the fear out of your next building and pest inspection and feel confident when you read that report, we encourage you to check out the course at homebuyeracademy.com.au.
And as always, if you found today's episode helpful, leave us a review, hit the follow button, share with someone else who's diving into the property market.
And we appreciate you for listening. Thank you. Remember, you've got this, as long as you learn the steps in the right order.
Too many first-home buyers are leaving money on the table and hurting their future selves because they don't know how to do things in the right order. That's what we do. We teach you the exact steps you need to take and support you along the way.
We help you move from a state of information overload to feeling excited and in control. You'll learn a clear step-by-step process that takes the guesswork out of buying your first home. You'll know exactly what to look for, who to talk to, and how to navigate every stage with confidence, avoiding costly rookie mistakes along the way.
We've created Your First Home Buyer course, a 10-module self-paced course plus online mentoring. Now, the course only costs $990 and you get direct access to us every week. You can share the link of any property you're thinking of buying and we can help you work out whether it's an A, B or C grade or a no-go zone. We even help guide you through your negotiations.
Trust us, you will buy a hell of a lot better with our guidance and you'll overpay a lot more than the cost of the course if you don't know what you're doing.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to join our Facebook group. It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions, which we will answer. Meaning you can make sure that you're not getting led down the garden path. We hope to see you there soon.